von Wiese. And Irina is a politician here in the United Kingdom, and she has also been a member of European Parliament, which I think gives us great insight into how Europe thinks, not necessarily collectively, but Irina, you've spent a lot of time dealing with foreign affairs as well.
I have indeed. Good to see you again, Dana. I was vice chair of the Human Rights Subcommittee at the European Parliament for all but 7 months in the last 7 months of British membership in the European Union, also member of the Foreign Affairs and Liberties and Justice Committee. So I have a bit of an insider view, and I'm still a member of the EU-British Friendship Groups of Parliamentarians.
Excellent. So can you tell me, as we speak, across Europe, we're seeing a rebound of COVID-19. And I understand you're not a medical expert, but you must be concerned as we're seeing these rates starting to come back up, and it looks like we're into a second wave of COVID-19. And here in Britain, the numbers have gone from about 1,000 a week, 1,000 cases a week, to now we're sort of punching towards 3,000 a day, 3,000 a day.
Which is, of course, concerning. I mean, everybody is concerned. And I am still absolutely flabbergasted how this government managed to get it both wrong. To get it wrong on the health side, to not protecting its people from one of the worst outcomes in terms of death rates per capita in the world, and to get it wrong on the economy by effectively having one of the deepest recessions and no end in sight. Sweden got it wrong on one side, and other countries got it wrong on the other side. But how you can get both wrong and then face a second wave is just mind-boggling. And I think we have to ask some really hard questions also on the way forward.
Well, we're gonna look like we're heading into other lockdowns in Britain. I mean, they are already starting to tell some centres specifically, not London yet, but they're starting to tell some areas where they're seeing the increased numbers that they should only allow takeout from restaurants again and not allow people inside. I mean, those businesses are already on their face, and how they're going to survive this, I have no idea.
Absolutely. And, I feel for them. I feel for all the people who aren't able to go back to normal, which is what we really desperately want to do. My own daughter has just gone back to school, and she was so happy to go back to school. But the truth is that if we do see another spike or a second wave, and that goes into the winter, things could be worse than the first time round. And we just cannot sacrifice the people who are vulnerable. So unfortunately, locking down was necessary first time. It should have happened so much earlier. We could have avoided so many deaths. Let's learn from those mistakes and do something before it's too late, whether that is a national or preferably, of course, a localized, much more specific lockdown. I don't know. To me, it seems that we are still woefully behind on testing, that there are so many people that have not been tested, that our track and trace system is still not up and running the way it should do, and that we really have to start getting our act together.
All right, if you're just joining us, my name's Dana Lewis. I'm the host of a podcast called Backstory with Dana Lewis, and you're listening to Irina von Wiese, who is a former member of European Parliament for Britain. And I really want to talk to you about Brexit. And everybody's eyes will glaze over in America probably, but there was a agreement that Boris Johnson, the current Prime Minister of Britain, touted as oven ready, and he ran in the last election November, and said the agreement's oven ready, and I will pull us out of Europe, and all will be well because there will be trade agreements and easy peasy. It is anything but, and now he is saying he wants to back out of that withdrawal agreement. Can you explain to somebody who doesn't understand any of this process what in the hell is going on?
It's very difficult to explain. I mean, who can possibly explain such a step? And from oven ready straight to burned and into the bin. It is really quite impressive what happened there. There are, and we've been scratching our heads in the opposition parties. There are two potential motivations behind this. Number one, he really does think that in some way he can pressurize the European Union in some form of last minute deal by threatening to scrap the withdrawal agreement, it's not just the withdrawal agreement, it's the most sensitive part of the withdrawal agreement, which is the controls between the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and mainland UK, which of course it means that there is only one alternative, which is to re-erect borders between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And that is not just playing with fire, that is actually playing with the peace and the Good Friday Agreement.
So why, can you explain, Irina, can you explain it to people? Why does it flirt with reigniting the conflict in Northern Ireland to talk about a hard border, a trade border, I think it runs 300 miles roughly, yes, between Ireland and Northern Ireland?
So that is one of the potential motivations. He really thinks he can still get some form of deal, and he wants to use this as, you know, to pressurize, as some form of negotiating tool, which of course is entirely counterproductive.
But why is the border sensitive?
Who would possibly trust a government, right, who doesn't stick to an internationally binding agreement? So that's going to backfire. The other potential motivation, of course, is that he really does not want a deal. And in my view, that is the more likely one. He has never wanted a deal. He now believes that it is impossible to get a deal that he can sell to his hardliners back home, to the ERG in particular, that is the most conservative anti-EU faction in his own party, that has always said that they would be happy with no deal. And he knows that any deal he could get is going to fall way short of, you know, what would be good for the UK.
Very quickly, Northern Ireland. Before we move on, why does it potentially ignite violence by having a hard border?
Because he has absolutely no choice. If he does not establish some form of customs union or free trade area with the European Union, he can only do two things. He can either have controls between Northern Ireland and Britain, right, which would lead ultimately, in my view, to the loss of Northern Ireland and reunification of the Republic with Northern Ireland, or he can re-erect those border controls that took so many years to dismantle, and that on the island of Ireland, which in turn would threaten the Good Friday Agreement. We knew that from the beginning. We knew that was going to happen from the very day that we ever talked about leaving the European Union. It is not rocket science. Look at a map and you know that these are his only two options. And he's now back where Theresa May was 3 years ago, which is...
So what is going to happen? What is going to happen to people in Britain? Because they voted for, first of all, the people that were supporting Brexit thought that they would get control over their fisheries, control over their borders, that there would be a trade agreement that would be negotiated. That there would be a trade agreement negotiated with Europe. They just wouldn't crash out of Europe.
Absolutely.
And so what is going to happen if there is not a trade agreement in place? What is going to potentially happen to people in Britain?
Well, firstly, I think we know now that a large group of those who voted to leave the European Union did not expect to leave without any type of trade deal. They expected there to be some form of trade deal. And we also know that if you ask people today, there is a very, very substantial majority who, in light of all of this that's happened in the meantime, would have rather stayed. Obviously, that's too late. So what is going to happen? Well, I'm afraid it's bad news. It's bad news on many fronts. Firstly, we will have, by January next year, a double whammy of a second spike in the coronavirus pandemic, plus the catastrophic outcome of a no-deal Brexit.
Why is it catastrophic? I mean, you're talking about trade and, I mean, food prices, for instance. They're talking about food prices could go up 20, 30%. Monstrous lines at the border because suddenly there are, right now, trucks go back by the tens of thousands every day. Suddenly you're going to have border checks. And the biggest trading partner of Britain will, the UK, Europe, suddenly there's going to be huge delays at the border.
There'll be huge delays, but what is more, there will also be essential supply shortages, and that is what we have warned. We, Liberal Democrats and other opposition parties, Remainers, and we were told we were scaremongering, Project Fear, etc. And I don't want to be gleeful because I really do not want to see this happening. But unfortunately, that seems to be the only way this government and for those who really still think it's a good idea to learn. Food shortages, but also shortages of essential medical supplies. And this is not just a threat. This is a very, very real potential. Think about, for example, isotopes, which are necessary for cancer treatment, for radiology. They are under the Euratom agreement. They can be, imported very quickly without formalities. There is no substitute for this agreement at the moment. Without such an agreement, it is very likely that cancer patients will not get radiotherapy on time. And this is just one of very, very many examples.
I was at a university, just picking up on what you're saying, I was at a university about a year ago, and they were talking about the huge numbers of staff even that run universities and research programs, right? And in fact, we were doing a space story on how they're putting up satellites that can capture other satellites and space debris and pull them up. They said 80% of their staff just in that project alone, I think it was the University of Kent, all came from Europe. Suddenly those people, many of them, will not be able to stay at the coffee shop. And then take it down to something more simple. At the coffee shop around the corner from my house, they're saying most of their staff have left. Their European staff are leaving. They don't feel welcome, right, and they're leaving. So people don't realize how it will affect Europe and how it will affect Britain in terms of research, employment, and trade.
Look, I'm a dual citizen, but I've lived as an EU citizen in this country for many, many years, and I know so many of my fellow EU citizens who are leaving now. And this is not just the coffee shops. We're talking about medical personnel. We're talking about the much, much needed nurses and doctors. I mean, remember when Boris Johnson went to hospital with the COVID infection? Whom did he thank? He thanked two specific nurses. One was Australian, the other one was Spanish, as far as I remember, or Portuguese. Why is that? Well, that's because he happened to fall upon two people who both came here as immigrants in order to work in the NHS. And from the EU alone, there are tens of thousands of nurses and of doctors who may not be able to stay. They cannot be replaced by homegrown nurses and doctors because we don't have enough. And the other thing is research, universities. I mean, the whole thing about the Brexit negotiations at the moment, apart from fisheries, which we can get to, is really insignificant. The whole palaver about state aid is about giving tech companies a leg up, right? The Johnson says he wants to give subsidies to tech startups. Well, actually, tech startups would benefit much, much more from freedom of movement, which we're abolishing with Brexit, from having the ability to recruit the best in the world, including people from Europe, without unnecessary visa regulations, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which is another thing that we're going to lose with Brexit.
Should there be another vote? Should there be another vote? Should Britain hold another referendum? It can't.
It can't at the moment because, frankly, we've had a quasi-referendum in the December elections, and we have to face the fact that we have now left. There is also no such thing as a unilateral rejoining. I mean, as nice as that would be, I wouldn't blame our European friends if they've had enough of us. It takes two to tango. So whilst I am absolutely confident that one day we will rejoin, it takes a hell of a long time to rebuild trust. And obviously, ripping up internationally binding agreements like Johnson's doing now is not going to help in that process of rebuilding trust.
You're originally from Germany. I want to just switch the topic very quickly before I let you go. And that is that, as you know, the main opposition party, not the main opposition party, the main opposition leader, Alexei Navalny in Russia, was poisoned by when he was transported to Germany, what they're now saying was Novichok, a nerve agent. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, it looks like she's in a very tough position because they're completing a pipeline with Russia this year called the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. She's under pressure from even within her own coalition to cancel that deal and get tough with Putin. And at the same time, she's saying, well, it should really be European-wide action against Russia, which seems challenging at best, trying to get all these nations together to take something. So how do you think this will play, and how do you think it should play?
Well, I think she's right in saying that we need a multilateral approach to the way that we treat rogue nations, and that would include China as well as Russia, with whom, of course, Germany, both of them. Germany has very, very tight trade relationships Russia maybe is a lesser problem than China, partly because of the extent of the economic interdependencies, and partly because of the type of infrastructure that we're talking about. Obviously, gas pipeline is important, but China in many ways has actually built even more important digital infrastructure. So
but with Russia, do you think it's time the European Union said, that's it? This is the second time. It's not the second poisoning, but it's the second use of a nerve agent, Novichok, which is restricted. It shouldn't exist at all. Do you think that the European Union and Germany is kind of the tip of the spear in all of this, do you think that they have to take action against Russia this time?
Absolutely, they should. Remember, there was a very positive, concerted action by not only European member states, but from states around the globe, when the Skripals were poisoned with the same nerve agent
in Salisbury.
3 years ago. So the same should happen now, but obviously actions have to follow words. And sanctions have worked, specifically in Russia, better than in other states, I would say, with targeted sanctions against specific members of the Russian government, but also the Russian business elites. So sanctions do work. Beyond that, of course, trade deals should always be subject to human rights clauses. And frankly, a dictator like Putin, who has no qualms of using a chemical weapon, now apparently as his favorite method of assassinating his opponents, should not be allowed to enter into trade agreements without further pressure. So yes, I do think Angela Merkel should go ahead and take action, but she should be backed up by other countries doing the same.
Irina von Wiese, thank you very much. Irina is a former member of European Parliament. She lives in London, originally from Germany, and she's terrific on international affairs and especially European affairs. And you've been, my name's Dana Lewis. I've been the host of this little chat we've been having, and you can listen to Backstory with Dana Lewis, a podcast. And there's a lot there on Russia. There's a lot there on Brexit. We've done a former segment with Irina von Wiese as well. There's what's happening in Belarus right now. There's a lot on legal reform and police reform in America, given civil unrest there. So we hope that you'll take in the podcast Backstory with Dana Lewis. And Irina, thanks so much.
Thank you. Great to